This meeting is being recorded.
All right, let's take a quick roll call to establish a quorum, and then we will move on to item 8.7 in our agenda. All right, Dolores Trujillo present, Vice President Mary Fagan. Board Member Jovita Dominguez.
Jovita Dominguez here.
Board Member Tricia Nguyen. Thank you. Board Member David Lawler.
David Lawler here.
Board Member Vicki Granowitz. Board Member Allison Cormack.
Cormack here.
And Board Member Neelu Patel.
Neelu Patel here.
Thank you. All right. Moving on. Go ahead.
Sorry. Agenda item 8.7. Discussion and possible action regarding acceptance of substantive changes to an approved program. West Coast University Baccalaureate Degree Nursing Program enrollment increase, or action on continuing approval status.
Thank you. Sorry, it took me a minute to come off mute. West Coast University was one of the other agenda items from the Education License Committee that was deferred to board. So no action has been recommended, or motion has been recommended by the Education Licensing Committee. And as we're opening up this agenda item, I was asked by West Coast University to read a statement that clarified a statement that I made in Education Licensing Committee meeting. So I'd like to take this moment to read this statement. At the last Education Licensing Committee meeting, I made some comments that I later found out caused some confusion or concern, which I'd like to briefly revisit in order to provide clarification. Specifically, at the ELC meeting, I made some comments that the board's ultimate decision on this enrollment increase, even if the decision is to deny the request in full or in part, will not have an adverse impact on currently enrolled West Coast University students and faculty. I attempted to clarify that the current decision is with regard to West Coast University's enrollment pattern going forward. The current discussion is not focused on removing students that are in excess of West Coast University's approved enrollment number. At the ELC meeting, I mentioned that typically when a school is found to have an area of noncompliance, the board gives recommendations and a timeline for that school to correct the areas of noncompliance. As to any students that West Coast University has currently enrolled, even for students in excess of West Coast University's approved enrollment number, the board has a public protection obligation to ensure that those students are not harmed and continue to receive an education that meets the legal standards to become licensed. So again, I will reiterate, the board's decision on the item currently under consideration is not going to force disenrollment of students who have already started their nursing education at West Coast University. As to the school's faculty, I will attempt to clarify again that if the board's decision is to deny the request or approve it in part, West Coast University will still be expected to deliver a nursing education to the students it has enrolled, even those in excess of its approved number. To be clear, West Coast University may, of course, make adjustments to its faculty in response to whatever decision the board makes on this request, as long as they follow the board's regulations related to nursing school faculty changes. So West Coast University can conceivably let go of faculty if they find that necessary in their discretion, but the board will continue to exercise oversight to ensure that faculty levels and other resources remain adequate pursuant to Section 1424, among other authority, in order to sustain the education to all students that West Coast University has enrolled and not just the number approved. Thank you.
Okay, so 8.7, West Coast University. Information on this program can be found in your packet starting on page 160. And board moderator, if you would please elevate the presenters on the list for West Coast. West Coast is requesting an enrollment increase in their BSN program to reflect current enrollment patterns at their 3 campuses. Their campuses are in Los Angeles, Orange County, and in Ontario. consisting of 220 core nursing students 5 times per year at each campus. Please see page 42 for current and requested enrollment patterns. The agenda item summary on page 163, 160 through 163 includes more detail. I don't think the page 43 is right. I apologize for that. I think that was from the last one. So you'll have to look in the agenda item summary, that area with starting on page 160. My apologies. And then following, just like we had with the last one, starting on page 164, there is regional data for each of those campuses separately, and they are in regions 8, and they're listed above. Los Angeles is 8, Orange is 7, and Ontario is 9 for the past 5 years. Their program representatives are here for any questions, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. So as we go into discussion then, currently, I want to reiterate what is statutorily required of our board. Business Professions Code 2786.2, and that would be lowercase b, 1F, says, when considering a request to increase enrollment, the board may consider only the following factors related to the ability to adequately train additional students. 1 is adequacy of resources, including but not limited to faculty, facilities, equipment, and supplies. 2, availability of clinical placements. 3, complaints that have been verified by the board from students, faculty, and other interested parties. 4, licensing examination pass rates, graduation rates, and retention rates. 5, any other similar factors specified by the board in regulations. The board shall not consider nursing workforce issues, including those identified under section 2717, as factors for the purpose of this subparagraph. Additionally, I do want to point out that there is a supplemental materials that was posted in addition to this, where letters of support were collected by West Coast University and presented to me to present to the board. They are posted and they are underneath 8.0 where it says Education Licensing Committee Meeting Supplement Materials, October 5th, 2025. In addition, those were all of the letters that were shared at the Education Licensing Committee meeting. We have added 4 additional letters that I received from the program director yesterday, and those are at the end of that packet. So all letters of support that West Coast University's presented to the board have been shared and on our website for board members to review. Thank you.
Thank you, Lori.
I have a comment.
Go right ahead, Tricia.
Thanks very much. So I sat through the committee meeting along with Chair Jovita Dominguez and Dolores Trujillo. And this is a very difficult case, really the most difficult case I've seen in almost 2 years that I've been on the board. In my mind, WCU has shown a very troubling pattern of behavior over the course of a decade, where they have not come in and asked for permission as they've more than doubled their students. We oversee 150 plus programs that do nurse training. All of them have come in and asked for student enrollment increases, and WCU was not. And they have definitely disadvantaged other programs because we see the areas that they operate in are highly impacted. When I asked a question about during the committee meeting about have they displaced other students from other universities, they said, no, I've never heard a complaint, which in my mind means they're not talking to anybody. They're just doing whatever they want. I was very, very troubled by that. And I don't want to reward bad behavior. That's kind of one of my tenets. And I feel like we have to have a very level playing field treat all of our colleges, universities, and nursing programs equally. So I've been thinking about what would we do with any other program that came to us, and we would give them some period of time to come back into compliance. And I don't know what the right amount of time for that is, and I definitely hold as a priority the existing students in those programs, but I am not very inclined to give this school a break. So that's just kind of my opening statement, and I would love to hear what other board members have to say about this.
Thank you, Ms. Nguyen. Before any other board member speaks or asks a question, I just would like to address something that by our records, West Coast University has never been granted an enrollment number, and therefore without an enrollment number officially granted to us, then there was no process also in place prior to January 1, 2023 to request an enrollment number.
Ms. Piazza, every other program comes to us. I mean, look, check the last decade of our records. Every other program has come to us and asked for enrollment increases. So I'm not sure why you don't understand that you have that obligation.
Ms. Nguyen, I'm not the program director of every other program. I am of West Coast. And actually, while I do, I would like to just share. Yes?
May I interject here? With all due respect, I know I'm new to the board, but I think this is an opportunity for the board to have a discussion before we hear from you. We would welcome you. We would love to hear what you have to say, but I think this is the board's opportunity at this moment.
That is accurate. That is typically what is done is we present this to the board has discussion, and then the board will reach out to the school or the NEC if they've any clarifying questions. I'd be happy to address some of the concerns that were raised if the board members want, but honestly, I think Tricia was speaking and then opening it up to board member comments.
Tricia, would you still like to speak, or are you done?
Kind of said my piece for now. I might have some follow-up comments, but thank you.
Okay. So I have a lot of concern with this also. I'm concerned about clinical impaction because those 3 campuses are currently in impacted areas. I am concerned that your attrition rates are very high. Frankly, I haven't seen a school this high in all the years I've been on the board. Your NCLEX scores, while 2 campuses are passing, you have 1 campus that is in non-compliance with NCLEX scores, and that's your North Hollywood, LA campus. So while there is a campus that NCLEX scores are low, NCLEX scores are low, we cannot approve an enrollment increase on this campus. And my understanding is there was a court case which you brought against the board that you've lost. And on appeal, you lost again. Reza, can you, for the benefit of the viewers, can you speak on those court cases? Historically?
Sorry?
Historically, yes.
Yeah, so this is, there's been a long history of West Coast and their sister school included as well, challenging the board's ability to regulate enrollment. Frankly, it's a little incredible to hear that they believe there was not a process in place and that they were not assigned an enrollment number. But the the school sued the board, alleging a number of things. One, that the board didn't have authority to regulate enrollment numbers because that was not explicitly identified in the regulation that speaks to substantive changes that require board approval. And that's Title 16, California Code of Regulations, Section 1432. As somebody commented earlier, every other school seems to have understood that there was a process in place pursuant to that regulation to seek an enrollment increase, and it seemed to go pretty smoothly for every other school to a reasonable extent. Again, that Section 1432 was not explicit about enrollment increases, but there was clearly a process. It was understood that the board considered an enrollment increase to be a substantive change. The Court of Appeal opinion has quite a bit of pretty interesting language about how a enrollment increase would impact a program and its ability to deliver an education, and why that would clearly be a substantive change even without the regulation explicitly saying so. So West Coast was alleging that the board's application of Section 1432 to regulate enrollment numbers constituted an underground regulation. And so they requested that the court order the board to grant them continuing approval and essentially back off from regulating enrollment. The trial court ruled against West Coast, and as you said, Dolores, the school appealed to the Court of Appeal. The Court of Appeal affirmed the trial court's decision and wrote a published opinion. Now, when a case goes to the Court of Appeal and receives a published opinion, that opinion is binding law. So at this point, there is no equivocation. The board has clearly authority over enrollment numbers. And as the court said, the court essentially ratified the board's practice over this entire time of regulating enrollment numbers. That aside, the board has explicitly amended Section 1432 to add language that makes it explicit that enrollment numbers are a substantive, enrollment increases are a substantive change that requires board approval. And in the case, West Coast tried to argue that essentially is an implied admission by the board that they lacked authority over enrollment numbers prior to that regulation. I think that's what Ms. Piazza was referring to by January 1, 2023. And later on, when she's given a chance to speak, she can correct me if I was wrong on that. But the change in regulation took effect January 1, 2023. Again, West Coast argued that was constituted an admission that there wasn't authority in place for the board to regulate enrollment prior to that, and the Court of Appeal rejected that argument pretty soundly. So I could go into a lot more detail as the board or as the school would like me to. Happy to discuss that case as much as is needed to facilitate the discussion.
Thank you, Reza. Looking at the document.
An additional item of clarification is Ms. Piazza may have been referring to the updated statute that I just included that became effective January 1. January 1 of that year, that statute that was included provided board direction on what they can consider for enrollment increases, not granting new authority to approve enrollment. So I wanted to add that in there as well.
Thank you, Lori. Any other comments or questions from the board?
I have a question for Lori. You said in your opening statements that the factors that we can consider include availability of clinical placements, which is what we always consider, but also complaints that have been verified by the board from other people. I'm curious to know how strict or what the process is for that kind of verification. For example, when you see reviews of West Coast University on an official site like grad reports, is that considered verified by the board? Is that something that should be considered by a board member?
It could be, and that is dependent on what the complaint is, right? If the complaint is something that holds them in violation of our rules and regulations, we could review that, take that into consideration, do an investigation, work with the school on that, and then come to a conclusion on whether or not they're maybe in a non-compliance, and then bring them in front of the board and have an action plan that would bring them back into compliance. Taking that issue or complaint at just face value and not do an investigation or not taking it into consideration is not something our board would typically do. And so we can gain complaint information from many modalities. We do hear conversations on social media. We hear conversations from public members that come in public comment. We hear conversation from staff and from lobbyists and from many. In any time that we receive those complaints, we have to do due diligence to take a look at them. Some of those complaints are referred back out to a grievance process because it doesn't fall within our purview. Some of those complaints that we receive or are made aware of don't even fall under our jurisdiction. And so they would go to the Bureau for Private Post-Secondary Education, or they would go to Title IV funding or some other area. If that complaint falls under our jurisdiction, we would work with our enforcement and investigation unit. They would then start a process on doing that. We could also work with our nursing education consultants, or if it is something that is something that needs to be addressed immediately, I have in the past reached out directly to the program director and said, hey, we have heard this. I need a meeting with you. Please, let's have a discussion. And so at that point, we would have a discussion, plans would be made in order to get them back into compliance, and we move forward. The entire purpose of our board is public protection. And with that public protection, it's about bringing people into compliance. It's not about being punitive. It's not about revoking nursing license or removing approval of schools. It is when we identify that anybody is in violation of the law, that they have broke our law, that we work with them to bring them back into compliance. And that is what we're doing here with West Coast University. West Coast University, when they were brought forward in 2018 after a continuing approval visit, which also around that continuing approval visit, we did receive several complaints. Working with the school at that point to bring them back into compliance, they were given direction from our committee. Our committee then spoke with them. The program director at that point, Kia Arena, was there as an assistant director during that point. There was a plan put into place to bring West Coast back into compliance. It did not go in front of our board, so it did not have a binding effect. The lawsuit, as discussed, was talked about. Once that became final, our board reached out to West Coast and they agreed that they too want to come into compliance and that they would pursue an enrollment increase request. So that is why they are here today. That enrollment increase request, we treat it as any other enrollment increase. They are starting out at 500 students at each campus. What they have is approved by our board in 2013 when we combined them from 3 separate distinct programs to 1. It did come out. We do have documentation to support that as part of our education licensing committee meeting that went to the board, and the board did make a motion on that. Now, in education licensing committee, I made the statement that said that may not have been clear to the school at that point because the board action letter just says major curriculum revision. It doesn't state on the board action letter what happened, so you would actually have to go into the minutes to be able to review what was discussed, review the materials that were submitted, etc. So at that point, LA campus and Irvine campus in 2013 in the first board meeting was approved to become as part of one single program, and they were granted 100 students 5 times a year. That's 500 students at each one of those locations. Later on the following year, the Ontario campus was reviewed. When they were brought into compliance, they were then incorporated into that approval of the program in totality, and their enrollment was equal to that of the program, which is 100 students 5 times a year, equaling 500 students at each one of their locations for a total student population for enrollment of 1,500 students. When that was in 2013, and then as you know, any regularly approved school visit occurs, that's 5 years later. 5 years later, the nursing education consultant went in and did a continuing approval visit. During that visit, it was discovered that there were many more students enrolled than what the board had approved in 2013. And so the NEC let the program know that at the end of that visit, I believe it was a 2-day visit, they said, hey, we found these areas of non-compliance. We will let you know what it is. And then they worked with them to come in front of our committee, the Education Licensing Committee. They came in front of the Education Licensing Committee in the fall of 2018. There was a robust discussion around it. There was more information that was needed. And so they came back in front of our committee again in the beginning of 2019. In the beginning of 2019, throughout discussions, a motion was made by the committee. The committee made a motion at that point for the school to return to the prior approved enrollment numbers. They gave them 6 months, and then they gave them the recommendation that they actually, instead of 1,500, Donna Gerber, the prior board member, said 1,800. And they said, as discussed here, that enrollment number would be 1,800. And so that was the recommendation from the Education License Committee. As we had a very long discussion earlier today, unless that goes to the board and the board ratifies that, that doesn't hold any merit. It's just a recommendation to the board. So that was a recommendation to the board. Because it didn't go in front of the board and the board therefore took no action, the prior board motion stands, and that was the one from 2013. So their enrollment at this point is approved at 500 per campus, which is 1,500 for the entire program. West Coast has come forward. They want to increase to 1,800 students, increase of 1,800 students to 3,300 students. Included in the materials, they have shown a timeline of growth that was actually requested by me. There were many years, that the 5 years leading from 2013 to 2018, where they reported their annual enrollments to our pre-licensure nursing study. And that study is actually open and in effect right now and should close this week. And we do that on an annual basis. So in the Education Licensing Committee meeting, it was made very clear that they thought that they were in compliance, that they were reporting numbers out to us on a regular basis. They were not hiding anything. And in fact, they were completely forthright in giving us that number. And so we did get numbers from them for enrollment reported to UCSF through our contractor, not brought in front of our board for a specific request to increase enrollment. And that's where you can kind of see that confusion may have occurred. They were reporting numbers, they were reporting it to our contractor. They were not following board process to get approval for enrollment, but they were sharing their numbers for us. In 2018 and in 2019, when they came in front of Education Licensing Committee, it was made clear by our board members that the expectation was to seek enrollment approval, going through the substantive change process. At that point, it was called a major curriculum revision process. We didn't update that terminology until last year to be in alignment with 1432 as to ensure that there's no additional confusion. And through that major curriculum revision process, it was outlined that they had 6 months. And in discussion, the prior program director with the current program director there serving as assistant director during that time, made a statement to our board per the meeting minutes that there would be no further enrollment increase that would occur unless we received board approval. That held true for a few years. And from 2018 to, I believe, 2020, let me pull up the materials here so I have them in front of me, enrollment stayed pretty consistent at what they reported. I want to get those numbers for you here, was about 170 students 5 times a year at each campus. And so they kept their word to that, 2018, 2019, and then in 2020, they grew. In 2020, they increased to 192 students entering the program 5 times a year. In 2021, they increased to 203 students entering 5 times a year. And then in 2022, they increased to 205 students entering 5 times a year. And now they are sitting at 220 students entering 5 times a year for the 2023 numbers. And so that is kind of the history of how we got here in enrollments. And that if there was confusion, as what they're saying, prior to 2018, that confusion was clarified by our board with the committee, board committee in 2018, and then again in 2019, and then as Reza shared subsequently through court decisions.
Well, thank you, Lori. You answered my second question without me having to ask it. So instead, I think I'll turn it into a comment. It had to do with the availability of clinical placements. Now we have a real number that we start with, which is 1,500. And I guess the 1,500 comes from the year 2013. So if this is a simple case of requesting an enrollment increase where we were just about to deny 90 students, and where in these regions, it seems like there's only been a couple hundred students in certain programs or community colleges that have been approved of, the idea of 1,800 students, even though those who are there, of course, they stay, they grandfathered and whatever, that it seems like a no-brainer to me. This seems like a very simple decision. But anyway, thank you for the clarification.
Yeah, the one thing I really want you guys to take into consideration is these students are currently enrolled in West Coast University, and the impact that is being felt includes these students already. So if the board were to approve the 220 students 5 times a year, that continues the impact that is currently felt. It doesn't alleviate it. It doesn't necessarily increase it. Per se. And so we would really have to take that into consideration if that's what you're looking at. But when you look at the clinical impaction and you look at what we've been told throughout this entire process, starting back in 2018, is we had schools standing up in 2018 saying, no, we're impacted. This can't happen. West Coast University has affected us. And that happened at the Education Licensing Committee meeting, where nursing program directors came there, stood up, and let the board know through that committee that they were having some effect. Additionally, when they came back in front of the board in January, they did say that there was more effect. The other thing is with the Court of Appeals decision, there's actually a statement in there where they showed that the board had reached out and asked if there were impact, and of that, 20% of the schools that they had solicited that information from said they were impacted, and specifically by West Coast University. And this again was in 2018, 2019, and those were with the numbers of 170. 5 times a year. And so that is when we start to have proof that the clinical impaction, the effects that was happening were directly related to West Coast University in those areas that were included in the Court of Appeals document, that 20%. Now, I guarantee you, I've seen the attendees. We have 180 people on here in our attendees list, including media, et cetera. So it might be of benefit to open it up to public comment early on to kind of see what's going on and get kind of the feel of what's going on out there, and really kind of take that into consideration. But when you're looking at clinical impaction, that impaction has already been felt. It is something that we've been working with. And in fact, I can show again through the data, 2018, when this was brought in front of us, there was a school that there was a request for 116 student slots growth. 30 were denied, 86 were later approved. And some of those were by doing a nursing summit to go out and discuss clinical impaction and clinical placements. And then later people were brought back and approved. Those locations in 2018 that were not approved at initial presentation to the board were Santa Ana, Riverside, and LA. Then in 2021, another denial of 80 occurred from our board when they were brought forth and asked. 40 were denied, 40 were later approved, and that request originated in Irvine. And then in 2023, this year, the 305 slots that have been denied, now adding in a deferment of the feasibility that just occurred right here, were requests that were located in LA, in Irvine, in Santa Ana. So the areas that West Coast is asking to grow even further in are definitely ones that have been identified as having an impaction that we have denied other growth of new programs in support of current programs that are already existing.
Right. And before we go to public comment, the last thing I ever need to say about any of this, it's not the student's fault. And so I would hate to see, I hope it's understood, whoever's there now, how long's the program, 2 years? If someone started this fall, let's say, I wouldn't want to throw them out necessarily, but that doesn't mean, yeah.
They would not be thrown out. And that was part of the opening statement that I was asked to make by West Coast University and provide that clarification. A motion today by the board, if the board says, I make a motion to approve 220 students 5 times a year going forward at each campus, then West Coast gets their entire approval that they're requesting. If they decide to say, I approve 219 students 5 times a year going forward, and there is one student 5 times a year that is not allowed to enter the program, it doesn't affect current students. Our board motion is not saying current students need to be decreased by 1 every enrollment, right? What they're saying is future people that are interested in going to West Coast University and enrolling, West Coast is only going to be able to accept into the nursing program the number that is prescribed today, whether that be 220, 219, or whatever occurs. It is a future potential student of West Coast University, not a current student. There will be no order by our board today that says you must decrease your current student population. It is you going forward, this is what we're asking it to be. Now, additional clarification, it is a 3-year program. We do approve them as a 3-year program for a bachelor's in science and nursing. What they have provided us enrollment numbers on, and I think this is very key for everybody to understand, is the last 2 years of the program. And they specifically have called out and delineated it as core nursing students. So the first year of the nursing program, which is general education courses, which are not clinical courses, right? They may be laboratory with micro and bio or A&P and chem or whatever they might have. Those are lab courses. Those are in that first year. And although under our jurisdiction for approval of that curriculum, they have not provided us with any enrollment numbers for that first year. We've only received enrollment numbers on core nursing students, and that is the final 2 years that contain nursing specific courses that have a clinical attached to them. And they define that as second year, first semester.
Thank you. That's all.
I have something to mention before we go out to public comment. West Coast University, with its unauthorized enrollment increase, is utilizing clinical space that California community colleges could use to expand their community college ADN programs. 28 community college ADN programs in West Coast University regions recently received CCC funding to either expand or retain their program cohorts. In May 2023, CCC funded the expansion of ADN community college programs in BRN regions 7, 8, and 9, regions where West Coast University operates, by a minimum of 296 students. If this enrollment increase request is granted, Southern California ADN programs will potentially be able to place, they may not be able to place additional students in clinical slots and unable to expand their programs, wasting millions in public CCC funds meant to expand ADN programs. The West Coast University enrollment increases may also have a significant negative impact on acute pediatric clinical placements, particularly in Region 9. And we know that clinical placement for pediatric students is tight. It's very tight. So I just wanted to point that out because we're also looking at the expansion of community colleges and keeping them in mind for additional clinical spaces.
I think an area of clarification with that is the Community College Chancellor's Office did put out a call to action to all of their programs throughout the state, not just located in LA, Irvine, and Ontario areas. And with that, they did put out a call to action for all of those community colleges to grow or work on attrition if the attrition was of issue. Those schools would still have to follow the enrollment increase procedure through us as defined in 16 CCR 1432. So they would come in front of our board, and our board would take into consideration everything that we're taking into consideration today. And what we've seen is the schools asking for increases in the LA, Ontario region, Santa Ana, et cetera, the ones that we kind of showed. It would be difficult for the board to justify approving them for a growth when they are denying other schools for a growth, because we need to be neutral and not approve public over private or private over public. We have to take all of that into consideration. And so with that, they would still have to go through the approval process, and they would, what would be seen by looking at what has historically occurred is that they would not be approved for that growth because of the location where they were trying to grow. And so I just wanted to provide that area of clarification. But there are many schools located in these areas, and I do see some of them in attendees for public comment that probably want to make some contribution to our board for consideration. Remembering, please, that our board can consider just the items that are outlined in statute, and affirmatively must not consider any workforce issues brought forward. As the language says, the board shall not consider workforce when looking at enrollment increase requests that come through from us. Thank you.
Quick comment also. Thank you, EOMLB board members and Reza for this robust discussion and for offering further clarification as we weigh this important matter. There's so much to consider. So it has always been the board's customary practice to evaluate substantive increases in enrollment. So I appreciate the patience of our guests on this call, that they are patiently awaiting the chance for a rebuttal. And I do want to hear your position. I'd like to also hear what your thoughts are. You know, what are West Coast's thoughts regarding its last approved increase since 2013? I'd just like to hear from them to also include that. You know, your increase was nearly 50% since 2013. So, thank you.
Scott Casanova on behalf of West Coast University, and our program director has a lot of information and some thoughts she would like to share. But there's a couple of data points that I feel have to be corrected that are incredibly important to the record. So during West Coast University's first continuing approval, which was 2013, there was no assigned enrollment number given to the university. And I encourage, it's in the records, it's in the board's records, but I strongly encourage the board members to look at the approval letters that the university were given in 2013. There was no enrollment and number assigned. In fact, the school's NEC told us at the time that there is no approved enrollment numbers for nursing programs. And there was not a process in place for that in 2013. Now, flash forward to 2018. As Executive Officer Melby told us, we went before ELC, and there was a motion by ELC to approve enrollments at that time and to grant the continuing approval. But the board didn't take action. And the board didn't take action in 18 or 19 or 20. And throughout that time, West Coast University is reaching out to the board saying, can we sit down? Can we have a conversation with the board to understand what our assigned enrollment number is? And I'd be happy to share the dozens of emails and letters we sent to the board during that time. But the board didn't take action. And I want to correct something that Reza said that's also incredibly important. The thrust of the lawsuit that was filed in 2021, because West Coast continuing approval had been withheld for 3 years at that time, was a writ of petition. And what a writ says is it's asking the court to force the Board of Nursing to either grant or deny our continuing approval. That was the thrust of the lawsuit, because we felt like we had been held in regulatory limbo for over 3 years at that point. And what the court said, and I strongly encourage you all to read the court opinions. As Reza said, they're published. But the court said, we're not going to force the board to rule on the continuing approval. But if the continuing approval is denied when the school shows they have the resources to educate the students that they're supporting, any decision to roll back enrollments would be arbitrary and capricious. But I felt the need to correct some of the inaccuracies about the history of what was approved and what was not approved, because as we sit here today, West Coast University has never had an assigned enrollment number.
This is Reza. I don't want to get too far into, arguing if we can avoid it, but I just wanted to ask one question, responding to your points, Scott. You mentioned in 2013, West Coast was not given an enrollment number. Did the board or the NEC know at that time how many students West Coast was proposing to enroll at that time? Was
Absolutely.
That information?
We reported how many students were in the program. But if you look at the approval letters say West Coast is granted continuing approval. There was no assigned. And if you look at the history, Reza, I appreciate you weren't here in 13, 14, or 15. If you look at the board minutes through those times, the board was not granting enrollment numbers during that period. In fact, I've found just over the last 5 years, and I appreciate the thought that the board hasn't allowed other schools to grow, we've identified 18 schools that have had substantive change in enrollment over the last 5 years that the board hasn't taken action on. And I'd be happy, obviously the board has that data, but I don't think it's fair or accurate to say that the board has consistently managed enrollment across nursing programs for the last 10 years. They simply haven't. And they haven't had the process. Even the guidelines that were at issue in 2018 weren't published until 2017.
Reza, are you?
Yeah, I don't. I'm happy to. We can continue kind of arguing the history. I'm happy to do that.
I do have
I'm not sure how. Go ahead. Somebody had a question.
When did the first lawsuit final? What year was that?
2022.
2022. And so if you're saying, Scott, that in 2022, the court said that the board should grant the approval because you have resources at that point, then the numbers that you provided would be the 2022 numbers, not the 2023 numbers. And so it would not grant you the full request that you guys are putting forward today based on your interpretation of the court materials. And that's the 2022 is the Court of Appeals when that was final, not the first lawsuit. So when was the first lawsuit settled? 2021. And, you know, I'm just pulling up the transcript from that. Thank you.
There was a really interesting line in that suit where the state attorney general, who was representing the board, said, look, if the school follows the process that the board is seeking and the school has the resources to support its student population, the board's going to approve the school's enrollment pattern. That's a quote from the AG representing this board from that 2021 lawsuit.
And so again, at that point, we would argue that the numbers would be consistent with 2021 when this was heard, not the numbers that you're asking for today, which is a lower number. I believe it's 193 or something per.
It was 200. At that time, it was 205 students per start.
That's not what was provided to us in the timeline submitted by your program. It says August of 2020 is 192 students entering the core program 5 times a year. August 2021, it says 203 students entering 5 times a year. And then August 2022 says 205 entering 5 times a year. It's again, going back and looking at the data that West Coast University provided, they were consistent at 170 students 5 times a year from June 26, 2018. And that stayed until the August 2020 numbers that were provided that says 192 that started 5 times a year for that academic year. And so for August of 2018, June of 2018, August 2018, August 2020, August 19, West Coast is saying that they had 170 students entering the program for those years. Kind of talking process again for our board members, when pulling up the November 6th, 7th board meeting materials, and it talks about 7.2, it says Education Licensing Committee recommendations. And again, West Coast University LA, West Coast University Orange County are both included in that, as well as West Coast University Inland Empire LA and Orange County. And so as you saw today, the board would typically accept the recommendation of the Education Licensing Committee, right? Because those were recommendations. So they recommended continuing approval. They also recommended to approve a major curriculum revision. And so what Scott has shared on the board action letters, it would say the board made a motion to recommend continuing approval. The board make a motion to accept a major curriculum revision. It wasn't until recently we started to state what those specifics were because of program director turnover, because of questions that were brought forward, et cetera. So we wanted to make sure that we were very clear moving forward. But in order to find out what those approvals were for continuing approval, what those approvals were for the major curriculum revision, is you would have to go back to the meeting materials of the Education Licensing Committee meeting. And the Education Licensing Committee meetings that fell before the board, where the Education Licensing Committee members made recommendation to the board, had a defined enrollment number. And that defined enrollment number was included in the materials in the 2013 committee meeting and board. And so I wasn't here in 2013 either. I get that. And so in order for me to find this data, I had to go to documents that are kept in perpetuity for cases just like this. And so the only way for me to find that data was to do a document search. And I was able to find that data. And I included that data in the agenda item summary for you guys to review. I put that data on board action milestones regarding program growth, starting on page 161. I went back and found documents 2005 that says BRN approved West Coast University's North Hollywood, Los Angeles County as a new LVN to RN ADN program. And then in 2008, I was able to show that they came back in front of the board and they BRN approved the West Coast University Anaheim, Orange County as a BSN program instead of an ADN program. In 2008, BRN approved West Coast University North Hollywood, Los Angeles County to change the current curriculum to a BSN program. Then in 2008, the BRN approved the West Coast University Inland Empire, Ontario, San Bernardino, County as a new BSN program. And then in 2013, this is where they came in front of the board different times, West Coast University combined 3 individual approved programs into 1 approved program. The BRN approved Los Angeles campus as their main campus, with 2 branch campuses at Orange County and Inland Empire, Ontario. The enrollment at that point was specifically stated as 20 LVN to BSN students and 80 generic BSN students each term. 100 students times 5 equals 500 per term at each campus, which would be 1,500 students total. The last BRN continuing approval visit was in spring of 2018 in areas of non-compliance. This was reported out to the Education Licensing Committee, with the Education Licensing recommending to the board, 1, continuing approval of the pre-licensure nursing program at West Coast University Bachelor of Science Nursing Program on the same annual enrollment terms and conditions as the 2013 continuing approval, which as they and said we have discussed today is $1,800 annual. And 2, that the board requests from West Coast University a plan that will make West Coast University enrollments consistent with the 2013 enrollment base within 6 months of time. West Coast receives its final report. And then I did state in there that no action was taken by the board. And so those are the key BRN board meeting milestones. And so the last approved enrollment was 20 LVN to BSN, 80 generic. Each term, they have 5 terms. It's 100 students 5 times a year, 500 at each campus. They have 3 campuses, 1,500 total. And additionally, just to kind of bring that into clarification, was to repeat that LA and Orange County were approved first, and Ontario was approved later on through a subsequent board meeting, a subsequent ELC meeting. And I had to find that data because a nursing education consultant had to go out because there were issues at the Ontario campus that needed to be brought into compliance before they were able to be brought in to the entire approval and be brought up to that same standards to be there. So per Shelley Ward, which was the NEC at that point, when she reviewed the Ontario campus, everything was good. They brought it forth. She made a note that came forward to our board, and our board accepted that. And so again, it comes down to process and understanding process. And as we saw today, just in questions and stuff from our board members in previous kind of agenda items, it is imperative that we provide the clarification of those processes. And so that's why I'm taking the time today to do that.
Thank you, Lori. Mr. Casanova, you know, I hear your comment that you made regarding what the court had mentioned. Should a nursing program seek board approval for a significant change in enrollment when the program has the physical, clinical, and fiscal resources to support the increased enrollment? Is that the statement that you were speaking of?
Well, I think there's two statements. So,
but you left off the last part. And the last part says, but such enrollment, the board may have no reasonable basis for withholding approval. That's what you mentioned.
well, no, you're reading from
That's
if I may, if I may, you're misquoting me. You're quoting from the Court of Appeals.
Yeah.
I was quoting from the underlying Superior Court.
Okay.
So in
That's what I
the
wanted
last
to
line that I
clarify.
didn't get to was the quote from the court that said, we're going to wonder if the school has the resources, if the decision by the board, if it's declined, is arbitrary and capricious. And what I'm concerned about is Loretta went through all the history of approvals between 13 and 18. There are dozens upon dozens of schools that had changes in enrollment.
Dozens of
We're being singled out. And it's exactly what the court was calling out is arbitrary and capricious behavior, because this school is being treated differently than every other school.
I think every other school has come in front of the board.
Well, the data says otherwise, respectfully, and I'd be happy to show you major enrollment changes in the last 5 years that didn't seek board approval. And certainly pre-2018, there's about 20. But even in the last 5 years, you have a number of schools.
Where did you obtain this data?
It's in the board minutes. All you have to do is look at, so if you look at NCLEX test takers for each school, and we actually went all the way back to 2005, I believe. You can look at the number of NCLEX test takers and see how that increases. And you can look at board minutes to see that the school did not seek approval to increase enrollments.
I can provide clarification on the NCLEX test pass rate, and it's been an area of contention amongst our programs to no end. The NCLEX data is first-time test takers, and there is no guidance that says a person needs to take the NCLEX within 3 months that they graduate, within a year that they graduate, or within 5 years that they graduate. And in fact, a few years ago, LA City College came in front of the board complaining that their NCLEX pass rates were low because they had somebody go to Montana, get approval to sit for their NCLEX through Montana, and they had graduated from LACC 20 years ago. So looking at NCLEX data to try to confirm enrollment is not accurate at all.
Well, respectfully, there's examples just looking at your own board minutes. So you can see examples of schools from one approval to the other, particularly between 2013 and 18, when there was no process, where the continuing approval and the minutes show the school changed enrollment patterns and numbers significantly, sometimes as much as 30%, without any approval to do so. And it's, again, there was no process in place in 13, 14, 15, 16. We can debate what the statute said or didn't say, but even the internal board guidelines didn't exist in those years. And because of that, enrollment patterns for all schools were fluctuating. And the board's own minutes demonstrate that, aside from NCLEX passing rates.
And I could provide additional clarification for the board. So there are a couple things that Scott is saying that's absolutely accurate. Those guidelines were entered into regulatory authority through the document that we were talking about earlier. And that document's called the EDP I-01 that is used for institutions seeking program approval. In that document calls out yet more documents, and that is incorporated by reference. And then those documents incorporate the next documents by reference. So that document that Scott is referencing is a guideline. It is referenced in regulations. It's about twice removed or 3 times removed. I could find the exact citation for you if the board wants to have some patience while I go in and look for that. because when I was working with our chief of licensing, we went and we were looking at everything that was in regulations because we tried desperately to bring all of our stuff that we're putting out to our schools and tie it back to regulations so that there was never any kind of thought that we were doing underground regulation. And so we worked desperately to find citations for each one of these. And so within that director's handbook, we did find that document was incorporated by reference, but of course it was long off. And so it took a minute to get there, but it was there. Now, what Scott is referencing is that in 2015 and past, as the nursing education consultants were updating the director's handbook to provide out to nursing program directors, they added additional information as points of clarification. And curriculum revisions were also then including enrollment increase. And so the enrollment increase was added into that guideline, just some specific language that called that out in it. It's not the form that was underground regulation. Any form that is incorporated by reference in reg, even if it's twice or second or third removed, is there. But with that, it can't be updated unless it goes through the regulatory process and goes through Office of Administrative Law. So when the NECs updated and added specific language around enrollment increase for clarification, that is when that form became problematic. And so when that went in front of the Office of Administrative Law, prior to anybody saying that it was underground regulation, there was discussions had and the board said, we'll agree to pull that back. That's a non-issue. We'll take out that minor, that update that says enrollment increase. And in fact, that document is continued to be used today as referenced in reg, but it doesn't contain the language that says enrollment increase because again, it hasn't been updated through the regulatory process, which any form would have to go through. So there is some accuracy there, but I wanted to provide some additional clarification on that. When you read the Board of Appeals document, and it talks about the board's use of 1432, and it does go through and talk that it explained that the board regarding Wesco's enrollment increase to be a substantive change because it was a material enrollment increase, suggesting a departure from 2016 guidelines approach of treating all increases, not just material ones, as substantive change. It added that there was no material harm to West Coast while the board contemplated its continuing approval, and that unless the board explicitly revokes West Coast University's approval, West Coast could continue to operate indefinitely. As of this date, the board has neither acted on committee's recommendation for West Coast continuing approval nor moved to revoke West Coast approval to operate. All of that is accurate. And yes, prior to the board making the decision to treat all enrollment increases as a substantive change, the board did have various ideas of what an increase, whether it was substantive or not. And so those requests would previously go in front of the nursing education consultant. They would, on review, decide if it was substantive or not. And by substantive or not, what they would state is this a major curriculum revision or a minor curriculum revision? Minor curriculum revisions at that point were approved by NECs, reported to the board, and just implemented. Major curriculum revisions would be brought in front of the board. The school could not implement them until they were approved, and then they would move forward. So when you read the Court of Appeal document, yes, long time ago, there may have been some enrollment increases that were considered not substantive. That is during that time that Scott is referencing, 2013, potentially up until 2015. Now, 2015 is when the board issued those updated guidelines. And that is when the board did specifically start to look at enrollment increases as substantive across the board. That is when all of those were treated identically going forward because we were hearing complaints from the public. The public, our schools were saying, we are impacted, we are having problems, things are not being handled correctly. The board at that point asked, and this is in the CSA recommendations from the pre-licensure review, where the board members went and started asking these schools and the NECs to go out and seek letters of from the schools that they're enrolling around to say, do you support this enrollment? Will you have an impaction? Will you not have an impaction? And so our board started asking of that of schools after 2015. Then in 2018, as we talked about earlier, there was so much impaction that was being talked about by our schools that the board then decided to hold a summit to have a discussion. So 2015 forward, our board has considered every enrollment increase to be substantive change. There is documentation within the Court of Appeals documents that shows that prior to 2015 and through the adoption of the initial rule 1432 through OAL, that there may, and I say may because I wasn't a part of it, may have been some times that the board may have considered an enrollment increase of 1 or 2 or such as non-substantive and did not follow an approval process. But I can affirmatively tell you, I have documentation from our board meetings that when West Coast had came forward, they made mention about the substantial growth that West Coast has had. And that in those more meetings, in the committee meetings, in the board meetings, it was mentioned in there that says you need to bring these in front of the board for approval. So it has been noted as early as 2013, I can go back and provide documents that the West Coast was noted that their enrollment increase was excessive, I think is even one of them called, and that they were stating that you cannot make these changes without board approval. So those are documents that can be produced. I can go back and find them if the board wants me to. I would continue on public comment, etc. I can bring those forward if need be. But again, I wasn't here during those times, so the only way that I could find that information is by doing a document search.
And
sorry, this is Reza. I wanted to jump in here. The issue that was brought forward seems to be evidence that I'm hearing of for the first time today about other schools that didn't go through the substantive change process for their enrollment increases. And I don't know if West Coast presented that argument to the trial and Court of Appeal, or if that's something brand new. But in any event, it's frankly kind of almost immaterial. I don't, whether West Coast takes the position that in 2013 there was a process in place. I think, it's pretty clear that at some point, many years ago, it had to have become clear that there was a process for enrollment increases. And I don't think that can be argued, beyond a certain point. But again, I think if there were other schools, that's a separate issue. I don't think it tends to suggest that there was uncertainty about whether there was a process in place. So, that being my opinion, I would say it's not ought to be a big component. I don't think it ought to take that much time in this discussion. Now, if the board and if the school feel like that's an issue that needs to be run to ground, that's fine. Otherwise, and I see you, Vicki, but I would, suggest kind of bringing it back to the request and the factors in order to start to make some movement.
Well, Reza, it's absolutely relevant and it's critical because it shows this school being treated differently than other schools.
The other thing I wanted to mention is, assuming just for the sake of discussion,
otherwise between Mr. Can the board talk?
Let the board talk, please. Go ahead, Vicki.
Okay, so public member sat through lots of contentious things. Where this feels like it's going for me, as cynical as I may sound, is that Mr. Casanova is laying groundwork for another lawsuit. He's bringing up a lot of things that could have been included in the backup materials but weren't in the backup materials that are now emerging, that are taking us away from dealing with the what looks like to me the primary issue, which is it possible for this school to have the enrollment numbers that they are requesting in an impacted area with the NCLAC numbers that they're showing, with the other factors that have been brought up. And my thought, and I could be totally off base, is that we do make a recommendation, do a motion, because this is just going to end up back in court, because whatever we do, West Coast isn't going to be happy with us. But that's what I think.
Is there any other comments or questions from board members?
Just a quick thing, if I could finish what I was trying to say earlier, and then I want to hear from the board members. And on Vicky's point, I think it's got to be a thorough discussion. We got to hear from the public, and West Coast may have more to say. But to finish my point, just the last thing I wanted to say about what was brought up about other schools that may or may not have gone through the substantive change request. Again, that's information being sprung on us now, but I doubt that the alleged other instances are on the same order of magnitude, with West Coast being over 10 years more than doubling to now the request being 3,300 students. They're in a different order of magnitude of any other school. And their enrollment increase today is, you want to talk about being singled out. The board is not singling you out, but to the extent that your request doesn't look like any other request before, that may be why it feels that way. So that last thing I wanted to say on that, and I'll turn it over to anyone else that wants to, board members that want to take the floor.
Chair Trujillo, this is Board Member Cormack. When it's my turn, I'd like to speak.
Okay, Reza, are you done? Okay.
I'd like to speak.
Board Member Allison Cormack, and then Board Member Mary Fagan.
Trujillo, and there's certainly been a lot of water under the bridge so far on this particular topic, and a lot of backward-looking discussions around words and legal decisions. I would like to focus on the data. So if we review the four categories that we are allowed to and required to assess, the first is adequacy of resources, faculty, and equipment. And I have not heard today anything that concerns me in that area. Number two is the adequacy of clinical placements. So referring to the BRN school survey dashboard again, as I did on the prior discussion, and looking at the LA area, the time frame I'm going to be discussing today, just so you know, is from the academic year 2019 through the academic year 2022. I have a variety of categories to go through. So with respect to clinical placements, you can see that at the end of 2019, if we look at the placements that were lost, that was 137 in the LA area. 3 years later, end of academic year 2022 was 372. So almost 3x increase in placements, units, or shifts lost during this time frame. So that's a concern on number two. With complaints, we'll wait to see if there's more information to be shared there. But then let's go to number four, which is pass rates, graduation rates, and retention rates. Quick question for Executive Director Melby. Are graduation rates and retention rates, are those the exact, they add up to 100, or is there some other level of nuance that I don't understand?
Graduation rates for the board, we consider a successful completion, right? And so what Title IV funding does when they look at successful completion, they look at time and a half. And so if it's a 3-year program, they expect it to be done in 3 years plus 1.5 years. That is not what the board reports out. The board reports 100% on-time completion. So if it's a 3-year program and student A, B, and C start, then student A, B, and C are expected to graduate 3 years later. And that's the numbers that our board has routinely reported out. Not student A, B, and C starts and students J, K, and L end in the same number.
Understood.
So what happens a lot of times when looking at numbers and some of the stuff that Scott brought up is NCLEX pass rates, and those are return from leave of absences, medical leave of absence, et cetera, not enrollment numbers. And our enrollment numbers are who starts the program at any given time throughout the year.
And then the attrition rates then are the people who leave before the end of the program?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Great.
Yep.
Great. Okay. So then if I'm focusing on the data that's in this section 4, pass rates, graduation rates, and retention rates. For me, the pass rates really address the quality of education. So I'm just going to read out the California NCLEX results for these past 4 years. Again, 2019 to 2022. This is all of California. I had to put it all on a spreadsheet, but hopefully you guys can write it down while we're going. 91.3, 91.7, 89.2, 86.1. Interestingly, earlier today, we heard that on a national level during NCLEX pass rates dropped about 6%. So we did slightly better here in California at the top level. Now I'm going to read the WCU rates for those same 4 years. 91.2, 90.6, 90.6, 87.1, 80.6, 80.6. So you can see in academic year 2019, almost at parity. California 91.3, WCU at 91.2. But as we go further each year, for those subsequent 3 years, the NCLEX pass rate gets worse, and the delta is 5.5 points, not percentages, but 5.5 points. So that's one area of significant concern for me in terms of a degradation in the pass rates, which for me is a proxy for the quality of the education the students are getting. And then let's talk about attrition, and then my last point will be enrollment. So with attrition, we have the California rates, again, those 4 years, 10.6, 8.3, 7.1, 8.7. In the public record, I only have the 2 years from WCU attrition. 2021 would be 12.9, 2022 would be 14.7. So those deltas are 5.8 points, again, not percentage, and 6.0. So that's concerning, and I know that Board Chair Trujillo brought up the attrition rates earlier. And then I just mapped these changes in the NCLEX pass rates with the total enrollment. And I had to do a little math to make sure that I'm using the cohort enrollment and the total enrollment because we've been going back and forth with them. But I think I've got it right. So I'll just say in 2019, the cohort enrollment was 170, total enrollment was 2550. Total enrollment then went to 2881, 3054, and then in 2022, which is the last year for which we have all these final numbers, cohort enrollment was 205, and total enrollment was 3089. So for me, when I look at this, I see a program that was able in 2019, again, we don't have the WCU attrition rate here, but was able to achieve an NCLEX pass rate that is consistent and comparable to the rest of the state. And that would have been at a cohort level of 170 and a total enrollment of 2550. So I wanted to lay out all those numbers because we've heard a lot of descriptions about documents and legal things, and they're all important. But the decision we have to make here today needs to be based on the data. And so I wanted to share the data that I'll be looking at. Thank you.
Thank you. That was very clear.
Yeah. And I have a question, Lori. You were mentioning a summit that was brought together. And tell me exactly again, the reason that there was some confusion, is that why the summit was brought together? And when was that summit for everyone, hopefully all the nursing schools, to be clear on what is the process for enrollment increase?
Yeah, so the summit was held, and I'm actually going to our website right now so I can get accurate dates because all of that was shared and is available on our website. Just trying to pull it up really quick, so please bear with me. Person's not finding it, sorry. And there was a report submitted to that, I believe, and because I'm not finding it right here, summit meetings, February 15th, 16. Sorry.
Helpful that while you're looking for that information, I could at least address some of the questions. There've been a lot of questions so far. I'm happy to answer those questions at this time.
Actually, after this, we'll probably either end or go to public comment.
So we're right now, I believe that was in 2018 and 2019 is when they started working towards the summit meetings, and they deferred action on one of the specific enrollment increases, saying please come back after the summit meetings were held. And then they approved that program that was deferred after those summit meetings. Those summit meetings were held across the state to gain input on the clinical displacement. And that's where that was. When you're looking at the Court of Appeal documents, it does say specifically 2016 forward is when the board made the enrollment increase process consistent.
And was that part of the summit process, was to clarify that? Did I understand that correctly?
That was not to clarify, but that was when the board members were receiving a ton of public comment saying that this was problematic. And the board members wanted to seek additional stakeholder impact to see what the board could do to help address clinical impaction, not address enrollment increase. It was specifically to address a clinical impaction. The enrollment increase process was clarified 2016 forward by issuing those guidelines that were utilized.
Okay. And my last question is to the last area that we can talk about is the issue of complaints. Have there been complaints lobbied that we're able to share?
There have been complaints. Some we're not able to share because they are continuing to be looked at, and you know that is what our board routinely does. We receive a complaint on licensees. We can receive complaints on schools, and some of them hold no value. And so at that point, it's no reason to kind of initiate any alarm. Because a lot of them are referring the student back to the school's grievance process. It's not a specific complaint that would fall under our jurisdiction. Some of them are approval worthy and they would go towards BPPE or something to that effect. Some could even be reported out to the Department of Education. If they're nursing specific, we would go through an investigative process, work with the NEC, let the school notice that this is what we have found, and then let them know that they're in non-compliance, bring them in front of the board and have them come into compliance, or if they do not come into compliance, address their approval status. There have been complaints received around West Coast University, specifically again in the Court of Appeals document. There were complaints that 20% of the schools that were contacted said they did receive some displacement because of West Coast University. There have also been complaints that where we've worked with the program over years where, faculty. So in 2018, and this was brought in front of our board, there were areas of non-compliance that were noticed on that continuing approval visit. One of them specifically related to faculty. Faculty that were not approved in the content areas were teaching in content areas were not approved for. And so that area of non-compliance was addressed by the school. They were brought into full compliance, and that was no longer an issue. We received complaints on that from public stakeholders into our enforcement, as well as our NEC found it when they were doing the review of the continuing approval visit. So there have been complaints that have been substantiated over the years. One of the most recent complaints that I can actually talk about, because it was fixed and clarified and shared with the school, is we receiving in 2021 multiple complaints from schools, from staff, some anonymous, talking about the use of clinical placements, specifically telehealth. West Coast University had provided us multiple EDPP 18s that had been signed by the clinical provider with clinical information, and our NEC approved them as clinical slots. What we later found out through the complaints is that they were not legit clinical placements, and in fact, they were more like a standardized patient. It was where nursing faculty that were nurse practitioners and such at the program were providing nursing education to students, family members, regarding, geriatrics, some psychiatric, some pediatric, postpartum visits, etc. We had a meeting with the program director and the clinical placement coordinator, and we let them know that we were receiving these complaints and that we were going to start an audit on all of their telehealth approvals. They asked for a subsequent meeting. We did come back and have a subsequent meeting. And I actually at that meeting brought forth the prior chief of investigations that worked for us to accompany to that meeting, because there was more issues going on other than just that. What was stated during that meeting was that they believed that they have the ability to provide this patient education because they were an approved program that provided education. We provided extensive redirection on that, let them know that your academic approval does not give you a healthcare facility approval, and that you cannot provide patient education or see a patient unless you're approved to do that. They let us know that they were not billing insurance. That was great. They let us know that they were not keeping patient records. That was fantastic. They also let us know that the providers that they had listed on the forms did not know that they were utilizing their patients as the education recipients of this. And so they voluntarily submitted 502 clinical placements on the EDPP 18s to be removed. And so when we brought that up to them, it was a complaint. They worked with us, they cleared that complaint, and they turned over 502 clinical placements that had priorly been approved, as asking us to voluntarily remove those approvals because they weren't true telehealth placements. And in fact, they were more so a standardized patient kind of situation that would be considered simulation in our board's eyes and not considered a direct patient care. Because it didn't follow the telehealth guidelines as stated within the state of California. So again, complaints have been received. We typically work with our schools. We let them know that they're in non-compliance or that there's an issue, and they work with us to bring that into compliance. West Coast University worked with us in 2021 with their prior program director to bring them in compliance by removing those clinical approvals.
A public comment, I appreciate that it's already late. I really would like to have an opportunity to address some of the concerns that were brought up. They were brought up repeatedly, and so I'd like to please clarify that information. And the very first one regarding NCLEX, if you look back historically, we have enjoyed some of the best pass rates for over a decade. Actually, it was like our crown jewel, and that's the reason why our students started coming to us, because they took note of our excellent pass rates. And the fact that we poured so much resources into, additionally from what they had to learn just to graduate, our program learning outcomes, but actually to pass the licensure. So thank you also to Ms. McCormick for that detailed analysis. And I think all of us could appreciate that when we went to remote learning, and even though I think our faculty did an excellent job at pivoting like we all had to do, all of the schools took a dip. And so while there might have been a little bit more of a delta with us, we remained aligned with the rest of the nation as far as a dip in NCLEX. In other words, when the national average fell to 82%, we were right there along with them. However, I would like to share with you, and if you're looking at the most recent pass rates, the quarterly pass rates, our very last year-to-date pass rate is 91.5%. Our quarter four actually was like 93.6% for the BRN year. And so we have rebounded. And I believe that, there's been a lot of reference to being out of compliance. And it could be that we're talking about the LA campus. We didn't the North Hollywood campus. I think somebody did mention that. And so thank you for bringing that to our attention. So just as a reminder to this board, we are approved as one institution, and our NCLEX pass rates are always published as one institution. And you will see that one-time snapshot is not referenced anywhere in any of the pass rates that are published. So with Los Angeles, if you were to look at the pass rates leading up to the pandemic, we did enjoy mid 90%, low 90%, high 80%. And while we did drop, we also have to recognize what did happen in that Los Angeles area. Our campus is in North Hollywood. And so there were stricter pandemic guidelines during that time. Our students at that campus came back to campus a whole year after other students. And I have a whole opening statement that I still would like an opportunity to share, and I will get to it. But what I say in that opening statement is that we are SSH accredited, and we are the first ones in California. So to talk about the resources that we have to make sure that we fill in the gaps where the clinicals, might not be able to, because as Ms. Melby said, sometimes there's low census, sometimes there is something that's happening that's making things less comparable between clinical sites. We have our simulation centers that are state of the art, and we recognize that bringing our students back on campus is our jam. I mean, that's what we do best. And so as soon as we could get LA back onto our campuses, we did. And in fact, right now we're enjoying our pass rates at that North Hollywood campus. We're back at 86%. So while it hasn't caught up to the other two campuses, we believe it will. Why? Because we are back to face-to-face learning. And that's really something that we did well before, and we are doing well now. Whatever happened during that time of COVID, our students were not protected from that. Our students had to take on extra jobs. Our students also had to take care of other family members. They had childcare, but I think in my opinion, they really demonstrated a lot of resilience to continue through. So that's NCLEX. I'm just going through this really quickly for the sake of time. The other thing that came up quite a bit is attrition retention. I just want to be clear, because attrition is one thing and then retention is the opposite. Now, I believe what everybody's referring to was that in this last year on the website, it may show West Coast lower than everybody else, but I do have to remind everybody, we have been at 79% consistently retention for years and years and years. But if you're to compare us to the other schools, it is going to fluctuate. And why? Because the other schools' denominator is so much smaller. Their N is so much smaller. So that when you put that in a percentage, it's going to fluctuate even more. So one year, one school could be at 69% retention, 62% retention. Then all of a sudden this year they're at 90% retention, when really it was only a change of maybe just a few students. So it would be a misrepresentation to put us in that category, comparing us to those other schools, when you should just, in my opinion, just look at how we've been doing heretofore. Our NCLEX pass rates have been at 90% plus for over a decade. We're coming back up to where we are accustomed to. Our retention rates in core nursing, and thank you, Executive Officer Melby, for bringing that up. We do have great retention. We've had over 90%, something that hasn't come up. And I think it's really important for me just to infuse into here, because we talked about graduation rates. When our graduates finish and they matriculate through our program, within 90 days, they find jobs. And their entry level jobs and salary is at $100,000, which is why our loan default rate is in a category all of its own. We're in a category of 1. And why? Because nationally our default rate, our loan default rate with Sallie Mae from 2014 to 2022 is at 0.0001%. Our federal default rate for 2019 was at 0.002%. I mean, these are the metrics to which we are accustomed, and that's why a third of our students come to us as referrals. They're the ones who choose to come to us. And so for me, it's a little disconcerting that there's isolation of this and that and the other, and I'm more than happy to work with our board, with our NEC in some of these improvements that they're citing that we can do, but there's not a one of them where we are violating regulation. Not a one of them. And so while we can say, yes, we could have done better, I agree. I mean, we're always in that quest for process improvement, but we are right aligned with everybody else. And the contribution I believe that we are making to students to provide access is incredible. And so, and I also appreciate Executive Officer Melby reiterating that none of our students currently are going to be impacted. But I'm sorry, I don't know if I even introduced myself. My name is Kirina Piazza, and I am the Dean for the College of Nursing. I'm the program director, and that's why I really wanted to speak out on the metrics that were discussed today. But I also wanted to share with you, and I really want this to go on the record, that I've been a nurse for 28 years, and I've impacted a lot of lives in my years in direct patient care. I don't think that there's a professional moment more important than this for me right now. And let me tell you why, because what happens today, and if this goes to tomorrow, whatever happens tomorrow, whatever the vote is rendered, is going to potentially impact numerous lives at our organization. And to assume that it won't would be disingenuous. Many right now are watching, and they're hoping for a positive outcome so that we could all move forward in service of our students and our communities. And I have the privilege in this moment in time to have the honor to represent to you those thousands of students, faculty, and support staff who have chosen to be part of this West Coast University family. And they are the heartbeat of this nursing organization, of this nursing program. And these students that I speak of, that I'm so proud to represent, they come from diverse backgrounds. They come from diverse walks of life. 70% of our students report to be of minority status. 60% of our associates, faculty, claim to be of minority status, and I'm one of them. A lot of our students speak English as a second language. And I think we could all agree that that ability is a great skill to have in Southern California, for the communities that we serve, that our students serve. But many of these graduates ran the risk of not getting into a nursing program because they were waitlisted at public institutions, story upon story. And public institutions continue to see 55,000 qualified nursing applications turned away every year. And those very students of ours who were turned away from those public institutions, they decided to come to West Coast University as an alternate solution to being on the wait list. They knew that there are many other excellent programs out there with great academic outcomes. There's no arguing that. But our students decided, and they chose West Coast because they knew that they would find those same stellar outcomes for themselves. And as I said, for nearly a decade, we've logged over 90% NCLEX pass rate, retention rate, same. I'm just going to repeat really quickly that our students, when they graduate, they make more than $100,000 a year, which is why our loan default rate is at 0.001%, which to me is unheard of. And then we are really proud of the fact that last year, we placed our graduates in California at over 500 unique employers. Our students choose West Coast University because they also know how much we have revolutionized healthcare education. Just a little bit background, we are WASC accredited. And as you may know or may not know, WASC Senior College and University Commission is recognized as one of the most prominent accreditors in the United States. Our students also know that we're professionally accredited by the Commission on Collegiate Nursing Education, CCNE, but what they might not all know is that currently we are in the process of seeking accreditation with CNEA, but we do expect full CNEA accreditation in 2024. I mentioned earlier, we're one of the first schools in California to obtain accreditation from the Simulation Center, for our Simulation Center from the Society of Simulation in Healthcare, and our speaker spoke earlier at length about that. And our sim labs are some of the most innovative in the nation. And I know not many of you have had I don't know if any of you have had a chance to come and see, but I invite you, just call me and I'd be happy to show you. We do, our mannequins talk about high fidelity. That speaker said that our students who are consistently exposed to high fidelity mannequins, they have excellent student outcomes. And we're seeing that because our students are sought after by employers at graduation. Basically, we've got the maternal baby simulation area, fetal heart monitor. I mean, there's so many things that we have that I'd love to show to you as a means of resources that we provide our students. Not only do we offer that, but we also offered in 2019, Microsoft Oculus. It was like the first, but okay, so I'm just gonna skip right down to the heart of this. The decision this board makes today will have a powerful and lasting impact on healthcare system of Southern California. I truly believe that, but I'm here on behalf of West Coast University students and faculty. That's my job today. And the decision that this board makes today will have an effect on them, on students like Paula. I'm going to tell you about Paula. You might hear from her. I'm not sure. It's been a long day. Her baby might be napping, might not, but she is a member of the Tule River Indian tribe, a Yokut tribe, about 30 minutes from the foothills of Porterville, California. She's a mom of 3, and medical care has always been limited on her reservation, and for many reservations actually in California that lacked trained nurse. Basically, these reservations lack trained nurses, and a lot of the healthcare providers on those reservations are not from that community, and tribe members are often reluctant to seek medical care from outsiders. So Paula, recognizing that need, wanted to bridge the gap, and she wanted to be the type of nurse that her tribe desperately needed. So she started as a medical assistant in her reservation clinic where she worked for 10 years. She started applying for nursing schools near reservations, but after 2 years of searching, she found wait lists to be too long, and in most cases, over 2 years. And so even though we were very far away from her reservation, she committed to our program, and she finished our program in the same time that she would have finished an ADN program. She passed her NCLEX and is now the second registered nurse from her tribe. The most level 3 trauma care hospitals in the state where she's a lead nurse. So when you consider your vote today, I ask you to consider Paula and the thousands of prospective students like her that will be impacted, because I just can't help but wonder why our students and faculty seem to be treated differently because of the choice that they made to come to West Coast. Again, a third of our applicants are referrals, and at the end of the day, what happens today affects them. They're the ones who go from waitlist to waitlist at public institutions. They decide to be resourceful and find a solution to begin nursing career with West Coast. And these students have a choice and they chose us. So I ask that they not be penalized for this choice. And I ask that future nursing students not be jeopardized because they will choose West Coast University. So yes, there will be impact today. The impact on numerous lives, hundreds of faculty and associates. And I just want to finish with this. The impact to access to quality nursing education is really what we're talking about, because I understand that not one student is going to be touched who's enrolled in the program. I'm concerned about access to all of those students who are looking forward to coming to West Coast University. There's so much else that I want to say, and hopefully I will have an opportunity to say it. I also wanted to thank Executive Officer Melby for the opportunities that we've had to work in collaboration, especially when we agreed to be part of the pilot for the California grad upload website. And as I recall, Executive Officer Melby, we provided a contribution because we were big. And I think that was obvious, we were big. And so all the glitches that we could have been found were found before this was opened up to all the other programs. So there is mutual benefit when we work together. And I really do look forward to future collaborations like that. And so, again, with the extraordinary caliber nursing program that we operate, our NCLEX pass rates, I'm not talking about one moment in time, I'm talking about who we are as an institution, our placement rates, our loan default rates, all of that. I asked just for the approval to be increased from 205 to 220. Thank you.
Thank you, Kiarina. We will be adjourning, not adjourning, sorry, because we're not adjourning. We will be recessing our board very soon, and we will be opening up tomorrow at 9 o'clock again. West Coast University will be able to continue to have comment. Our board members will be able to continue to have comment. Public comment, we do have an intention of opening up at 9 o'clock and going straight into public comment because we do know that a lot of attendees have been waiting all day to speak. So at 9 a.m. tomorrow, we will open up and we will go directly into public comment. And those that have been waiting to speak will be able to go in and start public comment, and we will delay at that point. I do have staff that I have to consider as well that are here past their work time that we do need to wrap up. We can clarify and go back and forth tomorrow on some of the statements that are made. I will not go ahead and take that time today, but there are additional clarification on the data that's there. One item I do want to point you guys to is starting at page 186 of the materials, and that our NCLEX pass rates average for a year for our BRN, California as a total, as well as NCLEX pass rates for every single school that we approve. And so if our board members do wish to go ahead and look at a comparison and see where West Coast University falls in, tonight it is there and available for you guys to review starting on 186. Report out. So at this point,
I don't know if it was just on my end, but I got a weird audio thing.
Yeah.
As soon as you were saying the page number,
page
you're going to repeat that?
86.
Sorry, 186?
Yep.
Okay. Your audio was kind of funny again. Thanks.
Great, no problem. I do have concern with public comment. I know that there have been public commenters that have waited here all day. Unfortunately, Reza, I'm going to kind of defer to you on that. I did have conversation with our board president about opening up tomorrow at 9 o'clock and going right into public comment. My concern is my board moderator has an appointment and he has to be at that appointment by 6 p.m. And he is typically off work at 5. So he is on overtime, not scheduled. I'm not sure how we would handle that. I don't know that we have a backup that can manage this virtual modality or anything at this point to continue more tonight. We are fully staffed and ready to start at 9 o'clock tomorrow. We can go directly into public comment at that point. What are your insights, Reza, on what you think? There are much more discussion to go over, specifically relating to the law, to discuss graduation attrition complaints and NCLEX. I know that that's out there, and I do know that we've got right now 158 attendees. I don't know that they're all here for West Coast University, but we do have 157 attendees in that would want to make public comment, whether that be today or first thing tomorrow morning. I'm seeking guidance on what to do to manage that since
This is Reza. So I think, first of all, I wonder, my thought was to take a recess, maybe a few minutes, to see if our moderator has the means to transfer controls of the WebEx to somebody else. I've heard, I don't know the details, but I've heard that's maybe a possibility. If so, then moderator can certainly leave, as we are already in overtime. If not, then we can come back and see where we stand. With this, I know there's a lot of, I'm sure, board member discussion still, and as Ms. Piazza said, she still has a lot to say. I know that our public has a lot to say, and every time that West Coast has been before us, there's been a very lengthy public comment session. So my concern is, of course, our intention is not to keep folks sitting around waiting, but at what point, would we cut it off? So I think, I would come back to my suggestion, see if there's a way we can transfer control of the WebEx. If so, maybe we can give it some time and see, how far we get into the public comment. And
let me ask board moderator here.
Real quick.
Board moderator,
Reza? Oh.
I do have a staff member that says that he can assist, but he is not with you. Would we lose this WebEx if he were to log in from a different computer, or are you able to transfer controls to him? Because he is not in office at your location.
He'd have to join for me to transfer to him.
Okay. we will be having Matthew Yates join. And if you elevate and work with him to transfer, we can take a break until 5:30. We will have further discussion with our board members and such. We'll reach out to them individually off the public forum here to see if we will still have a quorum to open up to some sort of public comment tonight for those that have waited all day to be in public comment that are not able to attend tomorrow at 9 a.m. If you are able to attend tomorrow at 9 a.m. when we open up, we will go right into public comment. And anyone that is able to do that, we would happily assist you in getting into public comment right at 9 o'clock. That would be before any of our board members, myself, or West Coast University or our legal counsel have any time to speak. We would turn it over directly to public comment tomorrow at 9 a.m. So if there are people that have to be heard tonight, we will take a 5-minute break right now. Let's make a 10-minute break, so that I can contact staff, so that board moderator can work with Matthew Yates to see if you can transfer controls to him and see if we can continue on to accommodate those that have been waiting today to do public comment. Thank you, guys. We'll be on break until 5:35, and we will be able to come back and let you know the plan moving forward and if the transfer of controls for the WebEx was successful. Thank you. Okay, I know that we talked about coming back in 10 minutes. That was about 4 minutes ago. I apologize. We have managed to establish a quorum and transfer controls. Board moderator now is our Matthew Yates. He's fantastic for stepping up. Thank you so much, Matt. We do have Dolores, our board president, that's able to stay for about 30 minutes. Our vice president can do about an hour. Jovita can do about 30 minutes. Vicky can do about an hour. And Tricia can stay on. So with that, we do have 5 board members that can stay on that would establish a quorum for 30 minutes. We are continuing to reach out to Allison and Nilu. I did see that I believe both of you guys are still on. Are you guys able to stay on for 30 minutes, Allison? Or okay, Allison can stay on.
Nilu can too, yes.
Awesome, thank you. So we will go ahead and continue for 30 minutes. Reza, at that point, you wanted to interject here, so I'm going to hush up.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to ask, just to be clear, was David the only one that was unable to stick around?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, and was he okay? And this is also to the school, I guess. Was he okay with us continuing and in his absence?
Yes,
I asked that for his benefit of being able to hear the public comments that are made when, for the decision tomorrow. And I
did ask, and he did say he was okay. He was sure he was going to hear a lot of public comments tomorrow as well.
Okay. So if the school has any concerns with board member David being absent, please let us know. Otherwise, I think the plan is to proceed with 30 minutes as long as we have our quorum with public comment. And then I think the plan, assuming we don't complete public comment, is it still the plan to pick up at 9 a.m. tomorrow, or as soon as we resume the meeting tomorrow morning with public comment?
Correct. We are scheduled to resume the meeting at 9 a.m. We will establish quorum and go directly into public comment for this item and then continue discussion. One thing I do ask of the public commenters, if you have to comment tonight, please do so. If you can postpone tomorrow, I ask for you guys to do that. If a public commenter going in front of you is stating the same thing, please defer your public comment to tomorrow so that we can have unique public commenters tonight, if at all possible. I will leave that up to you guys to decide. Thank you.
So, do we have everybody on? Should I take a roll or just go to public comment? I think we
just for the record, just do a real fast roll.
All right.
Please.
Dolores Trujillo, present. Mary Fagan.
Mary Fagan, present.
Jovita.
Present.
Tricia.
Wynn, yes.
David. No. Vicky. Allison?
Allison Cormack, yes.
Nilu? All right. We're only missing one. We have quorum. Thank you. BRN moderator, can you please open it up for public comments?
All right, I have activated the Q&A box. Anyone that wishes to make a public comment, please write that you would like to make a public comment. Please only put it once. I will call out your name and you will have 2 minutes for public comment. All right, Brian Tran, let me find you, sir. Brian Tran would like to make a public comment.
Clinical faculty member at West Coast University's Anaheim campus. In support of this application, I teach mental health at both inpatient psychiatric and community care sites. Mental health is a course that allows the students to learn to care for some of our most vulnerable populations, including the unhoused, veterans, and immigrants from all over the world. It's a critical aspect for these patients to have healthcare provider who come from similar cultural backgrounds and can speak the native language of patients who may not be native English speakers. I'm proud that our students come from diverse backgrounds. Many languages are spoken by our students, including Spanish, Vietnamese, Armenian, Tagalog, East African languages, Mandarin, Cantonese, and many others. By educating students from diverse backgrounds for careers in nursing and other medical professions, we can ensure that we have providers who can offer care to patients in their native language. This improves health outcomes and ensures more equitable treatment for patients. So please approve this application to keep access for future students.
Thank you for your comment. Gerald Rogan would like to make a public comment. 2 minutes right now.
I'm the Director of Nursing Practice for the California Nurses Association, and on behalf of our organization, I'm asking the board members not to approve West Coast enrollment increase request, mainly to protect the ability of community colleges to provide necessary clinical education to current and future nursing students. Unchecked and unauthorized expansion of private nursing programs presents a real danger to the ability of small community college programs and other public programs to provide high quality clinical education to their students. The growth of West Coast program without legally required authorization from the BRN has had a negative impact on clinical education of other schools that provide affordable pipelines. And I just want to go off my prepared script. Folks from the West Coast University have talked about people from minority backgrounds, lower socioeconomic orders, of course, etc., applying to their college. Same can be said for all these community colleges without being saddled with thousands upon thousands of debt that anchor them to their employer. Other points I want to make is California community colleges recently have sent a letter of intent to fund expansion of community college ADM programs. But if West Coast enrollment increase is permitted, these programs would not be able to secure clinical placements necessary to expand. BRN, in our view, is obligated to consider these impacts on clinical education and faculty retention when considering enrollment increase requests. It's clear that West Coast has displaced other schools from clinical placements and may make it more difficult to retain faculty at community colleges as the West Coast expands. And again, studies show that people from, again, different ethnic groups and lower socioeconomic.
Thank you for your comment. Rebecca Child, 2 minutes will begin now.
We'll begin the 2 minutes once they begin speaking. Allow them to come off mute.
You got it. That's what I'm doing. Thank you.
Okay, so I can
fully appreciate the difficulty in going to the Board of Registered Nursing to get increase in enrollments. However, West Coast University has consistently or frequently shown that they don't want to play by the same rules that we have. And they are saying that they can't, that they're providing a service for students that can't get into other colleges. Well, students can't get into other colleges because we're playing by the rules. And the fact that they're increasing their enrollment without doing any of the regulatory stuff that they should know, ignorance of the law does not mean you don't have to follow it, is absolutely chaos. And if they don't have to follow the rules, then why should any of the Cal State why should any of the Cal State universities or the junior colleges or the university systems have to follow the rules? If they can just do whatever they want, because that's an increase of $270 million of tuition. That's why they can have the great simulation lab, and I applaud them for it. But don't say that you're doing some great service that we can't do because you are not providing, you're not playing by the same rules that the rest of us are.
Thank you for your comment. Vivian Maxwell. Vivian, did you get the request? Yeah. Okay, I will try to go to David Benavides. David, you should be unmuted.
BRN, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to address you on item 8.7, West Coast University's request for enrollment increase. And based on this whole process has been very informational to me. I'm not a nurse and not in that field. However, one of the things that has been commented and that I do experience as a community member in California is the shortage of nurses. Again, my name is David Benavides. I'm an executive director for a youth development nonprofit organization called KidWorks. This year, we're celebrating 30 years of serving youth and families from underserved and under-resourced neighborhoods. Through our preschool program, kinder through 12th grade after school programs, college and career readiness programs, we're helping young people from, again, under-resourced neighborhoods be able to realize their dream of college completion. And West Coast University has been a partner to KidWorks for over 10 years, both placing their interns within our program, serving as mentors, as leaders, as volunteers, bringing some of their students to be able to provide needed health education and information to our community during the pandemic. And while our community was disproportionately impacted, predominantly Latino community in the city of Santa Ana, their staff and students served as volunteers to provide a lot of information that our community desperately needed and support. So while there is a significant shortage, I see WCU ready and able to serve in communities that need these types of programs and these types of students that are ready and willing to serve. Again, diverse groups that can speak to who they are as an organization, as an institution, and the students and the quality of students who are, again, servant leaders ready to serve and support our community. So I ask for your support in addressing this enrollment increase, as it is something that will benefit our community, both here in Santa Ana and Orange County and throughout California. Thank you for your service.
All right, thank you. I'm going to try Vivian Maxwell again. Vivian, you should be getting a request to unmute. All right, Ema would like to make a comment. I'm going to unmute you, Ema.
And thank you for the opportunity, the BRM. I represent a private ADN program in Southern California. And I don't want to sound as if I'm telling the BRN what decision to make, but please, I want you to consider the fact that West Coast represent, or the request to increase their number is going to cause real-time displacement for our students. I am in the Antelope Valley. It's difficult enough to get clinical facilities, and West Coast is everywhere around here. So additional 1,100 students or more is going to cause more problems. Our students almost every term get displaced, especially for the specialty courses like pediatrics and obstetrics. So when we increase the number as West Coast is requesting, that's going to be a challenge for the other small programs. Please, I am requesting and begging that you consider us. We want to try. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. We'll now go to Paula Gomez. Oh, we have lost Paula. All right. Oh, hey, Paula. All right, go ahead.
Hi. Hi, thank you. My name is Paula Gomez. I am a graduate of the WCU North Hollywood campus. I'm a member of the Tule River Tribe, and I'm asking you to support this application so future students have an opportunity to become a nurse. I was inspired to nursing by the need for healthcare workers at our tribal community. I didn't want to wait on a wait list and chose WCU because of its flexibility for me as a mother and its accelerated program. It was a great experience, even with the challenges of the pandemic. I was offered jobs before I passed the NCLEX and chose to work at one of the state's most rural level 3 trauma centers. I drive an hour to work, but it is worth the experience I have gained and the people I can assist. Since graduation, I have been the lead nurse for both the stroke and trauma teams. We still need nurses as others are experiencing burnout or choosing to do travel nursing. If you limit enrollments, you limit access for students like me that are committed to serving their communities. Please approve this application. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. We'll go to Jessica Schonberg.
Schonberg. I attend the West Coast University North Hollywood campus, and I'm asking you to support the application so that future students can achieve their dreams of becoming an RN. I was born with pulmonary stenosis, which most of you probably know is a congenital heart defect, and it was a nurse who saved my life by insisting to the doctor that I needed critical immediate care. And I've lived with that scar and the story of this nurse who advocated for me, and I knew nursing was the path that I wanted to take. And so after high school, I worked as a CNA in a memory care home while completing my prerequisites for a BSN program at a community college. But I shifted my career path and I pursued an education in personal coaching, and I specialize in leadership and executive burnout. And now, over a decade later, I followed my dreams back to becoming an RN, and I chose West Coast University as a returning adult student after realizing it would take me years, if ever, to get off a public school wait list due to lack of space and the competitiveness with younger students. So I'm super passionate about psychiatric and critical care nursing, and I plan to further my education to become an educator for future nursing students and integrate trauma-informed methods and leadership into future curriculum. So I'm asking that you please allow future students the same opportunities I have to serve the community and reach their goals. Thank you.
Thank you for comment. We'll go to Shauna Jackson. Shauna, there you go. Go ahead.
Hi, yes. Good evening. My name is Shauna Jackson, and I'm currently a doctorally prepared family nurse practitioner with over 21 years of experience at Kaiser Permanente. And my journey in the nursing career began at American Career College, which is West Coast Sister School, where I started in their medical assistant program, and I graduated there successfully. After graduating, I had the opportunity to join an LVN program with Kaiser, and I decided to advance my career, and I found West Coast University's LVN to ADN or RN program back in 2008, where I successfully graduated in 2009, passing the board on first attempt and becoming a registered nurse. I then went back to West Coast University multiple times, was able to attain my BSN in 2011, my MSN in 2012, and then also my family nurse practitioner certification from West Coast in 2018. During that time, I transitioned into many roles at Kaiser, which marked a pivotal period in my career. And then beyond my professional life, I am a mother of two, originally from Nicaragua. I moved to the U.S. at the age of 8, and the inspiration to become a nurse was from a personal experience with my father, who was in the medical field as a medic in the United States Army. Unfortunately, he passed away when I was only 5, and witnessing the care that he received from nurses triggered my desire to help others. And even at a young age, I used, his own stethoscope to monitor his heartbeats and, try to be there for him during his last breaths. And my father's journey was the catalyst for my nursing career. And choosing West Coast University was a practical decision for me. With a full-time job and various obligations outside of work and school, West Coast's flexible schedule allowed me to be able to pursue my education while maintaining a standard of living. And that flexibility was crucial in enabling me to achieve my goals while balancing the demands of my personal and professional life. Aspiring nurses need more access to education, not less. Per the BRN, 55,000 nursing.
Thank you for your comment. We're going to try Vivian Maxwell one more time. Vivian, I'm sending you a request to unmute. Vivian? All right, I'm going to temporarily make you a panelist to see if then you can give your comment. So here we go. Vivian, are you there? All right, I am unable to get Vivian to make a comment. Can she type the comment?
That's fine. Yeah, this is Reza. I'm just curious, Moderator, are you able to see how long the list of folks?
Right now, Vivian is our last one on this list. So it's Vivian and that's it. I'll try to promote her one more time.
Okay. Yeah, if she can't get, either elevated or otherwise unmute, she can go ahead and type it in. And
Vivian, you want to try to hit *6 on your phone and see if that unmutes you?
Also, while she's working on that, I think we mentioned starting tomorrow morning. I'm not sure if that changes if we get through tonight. I would suggest maybe circling back to public comment tomorrow morning. So in case Vivian's not able to get on tonight, worst case, she can hop on tomorrow if that's a possibility.
Yeah, Vivian, I don't need you to type it into the chat. I need you to do it on your phone on the dial pad.
If you're not able to come off mute, Vivian, you can type in. Okay.
She just said that she'll join tomorrow. Sorry about that, Vivian. I don't know why we can't make you a panelist. But President Trio, that is all the public comment we have for tonight.
Okay.
Would you like me to close this window?
Yes, thank you. Okay. Do we want to hear any more comment from West Coast, or should we pick it up tomorrow morning?
It's after 6, and the staff that agreed said they could do 30 minutes, and that was at 5:35. So I would like to respect the staff and the board members and adjourn for tonight, and we can pick up tomorrow right at 9 a.m., please.
All right. We will adjourn tonight and be back on at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. Thank you, everyone.
Have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Bye.